Welcome to the Urgency of Awareness podcast. I'm Jody Farr.
And I'm your girl, Nita Renee.
Join us as we take the topic of health, grab those concepts that we learned in season 1 and apply them as we discuss things like food, where we live, how that affects our health, and the dietitian field.
And as always, capacity builders, we're going to be looking at this from an individual, community, and institutional lens.
Come on in.
Come ride with us.
Hey, capacity builders, what is your zip code? Go ahead, answer it. I mean, unless you're in public or something. Now the next question is, what is that zip code you have? Tell me about your health, because it does. Come on in and join us.
Now, Jody, before I comment on your question, and you know I am, I want to first tell you all how excited I am about our guest today, Mrs. Maya Feller.
Yes.
You got the missus, girl.
Oh, Nita,
Yes.
It was such a pleasure. It is such a pleasure to be with you and Jody today. I am thrilled to be here. I'm Maya Feller. I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist. I have a private practice in Brooklyn, New York. And we're a small team of dietitians. We see people both virtually and in person. And we focus on non-communicable conditions. So conditions like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, hypertension. And I really believe in the practice that it's our job as providers to translate that nutrition science. What we do is we know the science and you know your lived experience. That's where you're the expert.
Yes.
We've got to marry the two. And we have to come up with a nutrition prescription that focuses on all the things that are relevant to you culturally, nutrition that is tasty, accessible, and affordable, so that we can help you live your best metabolic life possible. Like, you know, I always say, you have to be cute on the outside, but I really need you to be cute on the inside.
You better say that. You better, man, that is so important because there's a lot of cuties out there, but not cute on the inside.
There you go. There you go. I want to get you right all the way around.
I like when you said metabolic too. I like the word metabolic.
Best metabolic life.
Well, thank you for joining us today. We're so excited to spend this time with you. Okay, capacity builders, you know I'm going back to Jody. So Jody.
Bring it.
What does my zip code tell you about my health, Miss Ma'am?
Oh my gosh, capacity builders. Your zip code big indicator on what your life expectancy will be. So plug in your zip code, that gives us a big indicator how long you're gonna live. And in fact, almost 60% of our health can solely be determined by our zip code.
Wow.
Our health as a whole.
That's
right?
crazy.
Yes. That's why we brought Maya in.
I'm telling you, I'm so excited about this conversation now because like where I stay, I hear a lot of ambulances all day and all night. And my neighborhood is decent, but to hear that, like I'm always wondering how it's affecting my nervous system, right? So Maya, how does this information impact the work that you do?
Well, okay, so this is a big answer. And I'm gonna answer it with what I know now, knowing that if you ask me this question in a year, I'm gonna give you a different answer because my understanding of this is gonna evolve.
Absolutely.
Right? So here's the thing. When we talk about social determinants of health, we're talking about all of those variables that you, me, we all need to express our best health possible. So, Nita, like you said, where you live, you said you hear a lot of ambulances. Now, I want to ask you, in a 10-mile radius, are there sidewalks that are walkable?
Yes.
Okay. So that's an indicator, right? Do you feel like you could go outside and walk those sidewalks at any time of day safely?
Yes.
That's also an indicator. Jody, where you live, are there grocery stores that you can access via public transportation, or do you need to have a car?
Yeah, you can, just because my house is located close to a grocery store, but otherwise, the rest of the neighborhood, you would need to be able to drive.
Right.
Right. And I want our audience members now. All these questions are for you too. Think about all this in your neighborhood, right?
Exactly.
Because these are the little things that you're saying contribute to our health.
100%. So I'm going to go all the way back. So I think about where I live in New York City, right? So I think about where I am, and in New York City, public schools are all over the 5 boroughs. And the public school that you're assigned to says a lot about how you will be educated.
Absolutely.
The types of things that you'll be exposed to from an early age. It also says a lot about the peers that you come up with, right? So your access to school, high quality education. Are you learning about the importance of intentional movement, physical activity, or did they cut that for state tests?
That's a good
Do
one.
you get art? Do they take you out on field trips so that you can go to museums and see other neighborhoods? I was watching an old episode of Insecure. The first, I think it was like episode 1 or 2. I don't know if you remember this, but so the character, Issa Rae's character she's leading this organization called You've Got This, where she's one of the workers there. And they're talking about taking kids in a certain part of LA to the beach, right? And so she had this experience where her friend said, well, I'd never been to the beach, but I grew up by the beach.
Wow.
That's another social determinant of health, right? So it's all these little things.
I got another one for you.
Yes, tell me.
So when you asked the question about the sidewalks, right? If I felt that I could go out, like I have a high homeless population in my area. Even though my neighborhood is really nice, there is that factor. So that's where the hesitation came from. Was like, I could, but
But
right?
would I? Right? And so then here's the question. All of these things that seem like just part of daily living, it all trickles back to our individual understanding of our health, the population and community health, and then the outcomes. So imagine this. A family moves into an area and there's no walkable sidewalks. There are no playgrounds. So then that means the adult caregivers are not moving their body, but they're also not instilling movement into the children that they're caring for. We know that movement is directly linked to cardiovascular health outcomes. It's directly linked to diabetes incidence, right? We also know that it's directly linked to stress. Imagine you live by the beach. There is this idea of grounding, putting your feet in the sand, getting what I refer to as visual relief, looking at the ocean and the sky. But if you wake up and all you see is buildings, like I do in New York City, when I leave the city, I do not want to see a building, right? I want that vast expanse because I want to take that nervous system down and I want to get that blood pressure nice and low. And all of these things have an impact on our health. Now let's take it to the grocery store. Full service grocery stores.
Come on, talk about it,
with
Maya.
accessible, affordable, culturally relevant options are a must. If you have to take a bus, a train, if you have to walk, that's going to limit what you're actually able to purchase. Is it affordable? If you're on government subsidies, can you use the subsidies for the foods that you actually want to purchase?
Come on.
Right?
Speak on it.
All of those things have an impact on what we eat. We eat what's accessible to us. So in my area in New York City, there's a high population of students because there are universities around. So we have all the craft beers and a million different types of chips and this and that and gorgeous organic this and that. But let me tell you how much it costs. Are you ready to spend $12 on strawberries? Likely not. Likely not. So then you're going to choose the lower cost item if you live in my area and your spending dollars for food are tight.
Yeah.
Maya, so man, girl, you got me thinking. So listeners, I want you to think about, because it's about the awareness, right? So think about what messages is your neighborhood telling you about your health? What's being encouraged? Because when you talked about going to the park and moving your body, I know in poverty, we're moving our body, but we're moving our body to survive. I'm moving my body to run and catch the bus. I'm moving my body to run and catch the neighbor's kids or my sister's kids and watch them. But moving my body to decompress, ain't nobody got no time for that or space for that.
Exactly.
Or, and then I always talk about, I used to live over South Minneapolis, our listeners know, and what's at best considered a working class neighborhood, and no grocery store,
right.
just a corner store,
right.
Couldn't get anything that didn't have sugar in to drink, that didn't have caffeine in to drink.
Right.
Like that was 4 cases of, beverages, all sugar filled or highly caffeinated filled, right? And fresh produce was oftentimes not so fresh.
Or not even frozen.
Right.
Because that's the other thing too, right? So it's like, if you don't have fresh.
there was no frozen
Could
option.
you get fresh green beans?
Right.
I mean, frozen green beans, right?
Right.
Likely not.
And then when I moved out to the suburbs, and Nita's seen this, we got an acre lot, just being able to look out my backyard and see trees. Oh my gosh, when you said, to be able to see that, it brings down my blood pressure.
Yep.
Like sometimes in the middle of my day, I'll just start staring out there and I'm like, oh my gosh, just this little half-acre lot definitely helps me calm down, brings my blood pressure, definitely it affects my health.
Yes.
And I have so many grocery stores. I have like 7 grocery stores around me. They got carpet in. Yes, I said carpet. Yes, they do. Yes, they have carpet. And the choices are amazing. Right. And they make fresh food every day in some of the grocery stores. They have a fresh salad bar and they make fresh food right there, so you could just come and get it. So the accessibility of that. But those messages that they send, and not only I'm sure you get me to think all these things. So audience members, all these things around us, how are they impacting our health? All these things within our zip code, how are they affecting our health? But then also, what messages are they sending us? Because they're sending us messages that we see you and you're important and you deserve these things.
That's correct.
Or not, because as you all are thinking about, you're talking, I'm thinking about, for Minneapolis, the North Side, Cubs, right? And when you first walk in, I remember we had to have a whole community conversation. When you first walked in, you walked into nothing but junk food versus the other stores, you walk into the produce.
Yes.
Right? And when I think about the fresh food, because where I'm at, we got the carpet too. And so when we go in there, and I think, or that store over on the North Side, it's always the fried foods.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So, as I'm thinking about that, and thinking of you younger parents who have, young babies, like to think, like, in Project Diva, we're always working to get the girls to think while they're in middle school and high school, where would you want to live, right? Because all of this matters. But for those who already have kids or in that, the 20s, right? Like really thinking about how does that affect you, and then what is it saying to your baby as they're coming up? That's so good. I love that.
The cycle, the generational cycles are important. Like when we talk about a reframe or a restructure or breaking cycles, we also have to step back and think about what were the historical structures that were in place, right? How did folks from marginalized communities end up in the areas that we're in? And what does it mean from that perspective, where we know that there was a disinvestment in particular communities, specifically in relation to health, right? So when we're talking about communities that are well-funded, there's sidewalks, no cracks, there's lights, there's a plethora of grocery stores, there are beautiful fine dining, even fast casual where you can sit down and it's clean. The schools are well-funded. There are a whole bunch of after-school activities. So you have aftercare and before school care, all of these things. If you're a parent that is struggling to make ends meet, or a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle who's responsible for your children and other people's children, and you don't have that safety net, it's like a colander is on top of you and you're trying to patch that water that's coming in consistently and you can't win.
Because in your zip code, all those things are raining on you.
Exactly.
Right? And the other thing, and I would like you to talk a little bit more about this for our listeners, is how did these communities develop? And think about the zoning. Because in my old neighborhood, more billboards, more liquor stores, more fast food, closer together. New neighborhood, oh no, I got to drive now. I got to like search out a fast food place.
Right.
Like it kind of annoys me, I ain't gonna lie. But it's an effort to go find one, and less billboards, less liquor stores, associated in a different way. But that comes back to zoning and design as 100%.
Well. 100%. So it's so interesting when you think, just like you said, Jody, about zoning, and we think about this word redlining, right? Where these lines are drawn and then redrawn around communities.
Yeah.
it goes all the way back, decades and decades back, really to the 50s, when neighborhoods were deemed livable based on median income as well as skin color.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm going to put in our words for our listeners. So we literally wanted normalized dominant neighborhoods.
That's
You
right.
know, I mean, normalized dominant identities to be in, and we put that red line around it, and we made it very difficult. Well, impossible if you were a person of color.
Exactly.
If you didn't have the income. Right.
That's right.
Yes.
And so it's fascinating because these are the historical structures,
Yes.
right? So if we're thinking, and I love the language that you use, because if we're thinking about something being urgent, this has always been urgent.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about intentional, limited access to variables that are required for each person to live a healthy, long life.
Right. And I want listeners, because sometimes people will say, well, just move. And
It's not that
You know what?
simple.
Pause there. I want you to pause there because I'm over here in my head.
I said something.
I'm over here in my head because we're saying that from the 50s, but let's talk like seriously, it's still going on.
Yes.
From the fact that we see just in Minneapolis, all these new apartment buildings going up in all these other areas, but there's none in the concentrated spaces that are that were redlined before.
Yes.
So let's not get it twisted.
Yeah, it's
like there's
compound.
still going on, and we
Yes.
have to be able to deal with the then and the now.
And it's
Girl,
nationwide.
that's where I was going.
And
Just
it's
ahead
nationwide.
of me.
Listen, it was sitting in my
Okay.
spiracles. You know what I'm saying? It was
But
sitting
it
in
is
my spiracles.
nationwide.
Absolutely.
So this is the thing, right? Because we see the same thing in New York. And what we see in neighborhoods in New York City or densely populated urban centers is that there is a disinvestment, right? So Still today. So there is this idea where you said, we value you. The idea is we don't value who lives here because of income, because of race.
All the identities pointing down.
All the identities pointing down.
We don't value it. And it compound. Then again, yes, some people can move out, but then you continue. This is the place you can find affordability. This is the place that you find comfort. And so it continues. And then, like I was just in Harlem, what happens, and there's a whole nother episode, but we defund these communities. It compounds, for decades. And then all of a sudden, people start to come in and buy it.
Right.
The people have money.
Right.
And they start to redevelop and push folks out.
But then here's the
and
thing
make it the way it should have been for the other
begin
folks.
with.
But then what happens
Unaffordable.
is like my neighborhood where you've got this high population of students who are going to a private institution.
Come on.
And so then there is food, but just as I joked before, if you would like to buy chips for $5 and all your craft beer for, $15 a case and your $12 strawberries, then you're welcome. Right. However, if that's not something that you can actively engage in, and that's not even staple food, right? That's not staple food, right?
Right.
Then if you can't do that, you are SOL.
Yeah.
Like 100%.
Yes.
And I want to answer this for our listeners because I know some listeners are still saying, well, then just move out. And so what I want to talk about is I grew up out in the rural, but that triangle pointing down when it came to economics, right? And then when I came into the cities, I lived first in a suburb. But it took me a month to be like, okay, I don't know what this is about, but this is not what I know, right? It just wasn't. So I quickly moved to a neighborhood that was lower income because I understood how it operated. So then my neighborhood that I was in for 17 years, now I have a lot of normalized dominant triangles now. I got education, I got income. But even so, when I moved out to the burbs, how uncomfortable I was.
Right.
Because things, again, they didn't operate the same. And so if I ask people who hold a lot of normalized dominant triangles, well, I want you guys to move into a neighborhood that holds a lot of triangles pointing down. I mean, do you expect that there would be some uncomfortability, right? And so that's hard. It makes so not only now is it hard for me when people say, oh, just move, well, not only is it hard for me to afford, like you just said, this area, but I don't feel comfortable, right?
Well, you're not welcome,
and somebody will make it very clear that I might not be welcome.
Exactly.
And there's a lot of little things that's saying I'm not,
the
right?
social norms of the area. I think about that when I first started in nutrition, Jody. I remember working in a program that was funded by the New York City Department of Mental Health and Hygiene. And I ran my programs. I had a breakfast, a lunch, a dinner, because we had a meals program, and then we had nutrition groups. And I had the biggest learning of my professional life, where my group started at 9 o'clock, and my next group started at noon, and then the next group started at 4, and that was the time. Well, that was not the social norm of the folks that we were serving. They were like, 9 is a suggestion.
Absolutely.
Noon is a suggestion, and 4 is a suggestion.
All time, my world
time
is
a
suggestion. And some listeners are like, yeah, and some just started shaking back and forth. No, time is an absolute.
But then here's the thing. You're coming to get a meal and nutrition education and a Metro card. And in New York City, Metro cards are the key to being able to travel.
Yep.
I had to understand that because I was stepping into a very different social norm, that the priority there was not the nutrition education. Me, dietitian, I was like, but you want the nutrition education. And they were like, girl, we don't care about the nutrition education. I care about the meal and the Metro card.
Yes, I'll nod and smile as long as you give me a Metro card at
and
the
a
end.
meal.
Yes, yes.
And so I had to learn that in serving a community that had been totally left behind, like completely left behind, HIV, AIDS, Hep C, unstably housed, also mental health condition, that I had to reorganize myself, not ask them to reorganize in terms of me.
Wow.
So it was meals first.
Yeah.
Nutrition
But I'm going to hit a
education.
pause. I'm going to hit a pause button because that's a tool. That is a tool for myself and
Yes.
for our audience members.
Yes.
Are we, when we gain awareness, are we reorganizing ourselves when we show up to work? Or are we continually asking participants to reorganize themselves to be conducive to our organization and our method of delivery? So that's a great tool to reorganize ourselves. As we gain awareness, capacity builders, we got to reorganize ourselves, show up differently, right, Mime? I'm hearing you. And stop asking other folks that we're actually there to serve to reorganize.
Right, if we're taking care of people, and that's the whole thing, right? In nutrition, it's my job to take care of you. If I'm going to take care of you, then I need to actually get myself out of the way.
Come on.
And I have to say, I know what I know, but there are plenty of things that I don't, and I'm going to let you teach me so that I can get closer to you and we can take this walk together. Otherwise, it's just me being like, you didn't eat your vegetables.
and it's one more message of failure.
Right.
It's one more negative message.
Right.
And listeners, you know, you got the book, you looked at it, we talk about how we put more asset-based positive language and descriptors on normalized dominant identities. And many times we put more deficit. So just having an identity that isn't normalized dominant, you're going to be more subjected to deficit descriptors.
That's right.
But then I come to you, and if you're not reorganizing yourself, then ultimately you're telling me the way I'm eating is wrong.
Right.
And that perpetuates, I mean,
the cycle.
Absolutely.
And then you're coming in, and here's the other thing that I often say, right? We know that folks from marginalized communities experience trauma and stress in a very different way.
Absolutely.
I was reading earlier today about the way that women in general internalize stress and then the way that Black women internalize stress.
Come on.
And so if I have a patient that's coming to see me with cardiovascular disease and I start with the negative, you have not done, you are non-compliant, that's negative language.
Absolutely.
I'm reinforcing the stigma and reinforcing the stress, and not actually creating a safe space where they can engage in dialogue and we can say, well, how do we problem solve for the situation that you're in? Because I understand that there's structures at play that are keeping you down. My job is to figure out, how do I help you engage in small step activities to improve your cardiovascular health?
Taking into I'm just saying, otherwise, how do you get there?
Right.
Now you're causing more problems than what you came with.
Exactly.
Yeah. And for our listeners, what I heard you say, Maya, is if you just look at it as individual choice, like if you just tell her, oh, this woman, you chose wrong, you just took health into the social determinants and you didn't even think about it.
Exactly.
You didn't think about this woman's zip code. You didn't think about all the social determinants. In the book we say you didn't think about the societal system this woman is living in and what she has to address. You just saw she didn't get where you wanted her to go, and so we blame the individual.
Exactly.
And how many times do you and I, listeners, we do that? And rather than take a step back and look at that whole, whether it's the social determinants of health or the whole societal system, we just focus in on the individual.
That's right.
And then we end up doing, I think, more harm than good.
100%. It's like I hear all the time in nutrition, we all have the same 24 hours in the day.
Oh, wow.
The phone.
We do not have the same 24 hours.
Let's just be real. Do you have a nanny?
Right.
You know, like, are your groceries being delivered? Can you afford the delivery fee? Because
you got money for groceries.
You know, do you have 2 weeks off vacation?
Come on.
Yes.
Speak on
like,
it.
So these are the things that impact the ability to be healthy. And so when we're talking about, and I don't mean healthy from the greenwashing perspective, I mean that real, true base metabolic health. Is your blood pressure in check? How are your lipids? What is your cardiovascular profile? How are your blood sugars? Are you able to sleep? Can you have bowel movements on a regular basis?
And when I say nobody knows these questions to ask, like, this is so good. I didn't mean to interrupt you. That was good.
And I want, as audience members, as you answer all the questions that Maya just gave, I want you to also think about how does your zip code and where you live play into that.
Right.
Like, how does where you live, if you're like, yeah, my blood pressure is in check. Yeah, because I've cut out salt. Yes, great, that individual choice, love it. And then what about the social determinants? What about your zip code? What else is are you like me? Do you have a backyard you can look out and just kind of decompress?
Right.
You know, because I know there's a lot of little things that I'm in my zip code now that are absolutely making me feel better.
Right.
It's not just that individual choice.
You know, Jody, the other thing too I often think about when I'm working with patients, because I do work with disease, right?
Yeah.
We also talk about time to diagnosis and time to treat. And when I say time to diagnosis, I mean how quickly are you diagnosed with any given condition, right? And between that diagnosis, how quickly are you entered into treatment?
Gotcha.
And that's a major, right? Because that requires either disposable income to deal with whatever the condition is, and a high quality team that sees you, hears you, and actually is interested in getting to the bottom of whatever it is that is going on.
Right.
And that is a major determinant, because we know that folks that live in marginalized communities, that time to diagnosis is significantly longer, and there's a delay in the time to treatment, which means that we're seeing worse and worse health outcomes, if not associated with actually morbidity and mortality.
And then that delay, and then when you do work with folks, you're oftentimes working with an institution that still operates normalized dominant.
Exactly.
And you're often working with providers that don't maybe always understand your experience because they don't have that awareness or they didn't live it. That's audience, that's why this is, I know we're passionate about this, is that we have to, if we didn't live those experiences, and we can't live all the identities, obviously I can never be a black woman. Crack me up saying that, right? I mean, you know, a girl can tan only so much, right? It's not gonna happen. But do I have awareness? Am I going, hey, wait a second, be living in this white body, what has that gotten me? How has that, you know, affected my health? Because it does. And be open to hearing about the other, because with that awareness, then we can start to, when people interact with our institutions, we can relate better to them. Because when you're talking, I'm like, man, you got people, man, there's that delay from diagnosis to treatment, but they're also then still working in, I still have to go to get treatment in a normalized dominant institution, often by people who I might not relate to.
Right,
and one
or
thing
might not understand.
Right.
Didn't you see, oh my goodness, here I am again with social media. You know, I'm trying to stay current.
You know.
But so there was this really interesting story of this Black mom whose child, I believe, was inpatient at a hospital. I can't recall for what. Or maybe it was the patient themselves. They were inpatient at a hospital, and the provider came in. So the doctor came in during rounds, and the patient was doing this. What's this?
You know, our hair is itching. The scalp is itching.
That's right.
Okay. Provider thought she was crazy.
Oh my gosh.
Because she was tapping her head the whole time. And so no one ever said what's actually going on. They got a psych consult for her. that is walking into normalized dominance.
Absolutely.
That was a perfect
That's
example.
example of what not having awareness. Because I don't tap my head, but I do at least know what that, you know what I mean?
Right.
You know, but that's exposure and being willing to understand.
So just
again,
asking a question.
Right?
Yeah.
Why are you tapping your head?
Yeah.
Okay,
What's
that
happening
mean?
there?
Yeah.
You good?
And be like,
Everything okay?
right.
You know?
Wow.
Yep.
That's
good.
exactly what I'm talking about. So we can't always have our identity is our identity, and some can change, but some don't.
Right.
But that doesn't mean we can't start to gain more awareness, so that when people do come in, we have more understanding and more relatable, right? And taking that big zip code and that big social determinants, how are all these little things affecting our health? Because it's not just about choice.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh.
And I guess my last, before we go ahead and begin to wind it up, I've had family members that are very close to me who've had, ailments that none of them have ever had a dietitian.
Yeah.
Right.
So like, when do you get a dietitian? Like, what do you, how sick do you have to be to get a dietitian?
That's a fantastic question. So it's really interesting because it's not on everyone's care plan. So if you have community care plans, nutrition services don't tend to be covered in a meaningful way. Oftentimes they wait for someone to be quite ill. So you could have renal disease, so kidney disease, and you'll get 3 sessions. That's what's covered in the course of a year. When people start to have the more choice plans, then it's often 10 sessions for what they refer to as healthy diet, and then 26 sessions for, and this is what they say, obesity plus another condition. And I mean, that's a whole nother story, because I actually think that that's the wrong direction for us to be going in. I think it should be, once there's metabolic dysfunction, diabetes, high cholesterol, you should be covered.
Absolutely.
Right? And I actually think before is probably helpful, just like you said, how sick do you have to be?
Right.
That's so
before
spot
we do
on,
something.
because several family members are diabetic, and it's like, how are you supposed to? This is not what you're supposed to be eating.
Right.
Yeah.
And then again, my family with cancer, I just remember the doctor telling them to go home and don't like get off of meats, get off of, and it was like they had to do it all on their own.
Right.
So that's real. I'm glad you touched on that. Thank you.
Of
So
course, thank
being
you for
aware
asking.
of the profession and the accessibility.
Right.
That's awesome. Yeah.
I mean, it's so funny. I was reading something the other day, and they were saying, I wish that like the dental arts were more highly regarded. Digestion begins in your mouth. And if you have less than 5 tooth units, you're at risk for malnutrition. And then you go into marginalized communities and you think about, well, what's the oral health? What's going on there?
It's horrible.
Right? So it's all these little things that play into the bigger picture. I know. Once you peel that onion,
right,
it's like,
going.
And that's why this whole idea of social determinants of health is so urgent.
Yeah.
Because it really impacts every single part of how health plays out for individuals, communities, and populations at large.
Right. So I'm going to end with this tool, because I know you're going to wrap us up. But that tool, that our health is not just determined by our individual choice.
That's correct.
And for us to be reflective on how does our zip code and all the messages and all the things that we have access to, how does that affect our health? You've really opened my eyes on that. And to think about, I liked how you started, that this has been historical. We didn't just get certain zip codes the way they are.
Correct.
And it comes right back to normalized dominant identities, right? And not wanting to understand or even allow the identities that aren't normalized dominant to live with.
That's right.
And how that now affects our health. Ms. Maya, I want to thank you so much for being here today, for opening up our eyes to think about, I'm going to use our words, the societal system, but that's the social determinants. That it's not, I'm feeling better about myself. It's not just my choice that I'm big boned, okay? There's been some things that have gone into it. And they are bones, by the way. They're bones. My bones get bigger and smaller sometimes.
And we love the big bones.
Yes.
We're here for the big bones.
But I love, you got me thinking about all the little things that happen, and also, are we showing up different? And I just thank you so much for being here. Miss Nita, oh my gosh.
Well, I'm going to take us on home.
Right.
As we close, you all, this was a fire session. So, I hope you enjoyed it. And remember, capacity builders, this is us building capacity individually, in our communities and in our institutions. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you chose to be here with us. We appreciate you, and we'll see you on the next one.